Thank you for taking the time to join us. We know this is a busy time for everyone, and the importance of our work building local solutions to the complex and interconnected challenges we face is more obvious than ever. At the same time, we know it can be hard to stay positive and focused as we see stages of collapse happening around us. And our team at Transition US sees connecting the US transition movement to itself, enhancing connections between local groups, sharing resources, ideas, and inspiration as one of our most important jobs at this time. Our wonderful local transition initiative support working group. Some of you might be here tonight. We've got Shari Stuber, Kat Vanderstraten. Hi Shari. Leslie McKenzie, William Mutt, Shakhtari Baloo. Some of you on the call might have been hearing from these folks because we've been making calls to connect with grassroots leaders across the country and ask how you're doing during these unprecedented times. And we've heard that many of you have been doing this work for years, preparing for this, and some of you are understandably tired. We've also heard during these calls, as well as during our ongoing series of national network strategy conversations, the incredible stories of your local work. Skill shares, repair cafes, mutual aid networks, disaster relief efforts, neighbors helping each other prepare for and supporting each other through times of crisis, and building new systems like local investing clubs, regenerative business incubators, solarized campaigns, community energy projects, and so much more. We've also heard over and over again the life-changing impact that transition has on individuals. Everyday people committing their lives to the vision of a more just, regenerative world. Stepping up to walk the talk and learning how to be the kind of leaders these unprecedented times demand of us. So we're here tonight to celebrate, reflect, and amplify these stories. They are medicine for the human spirit that is so desperately needed during these times. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for all that you do. Yes, you. I see you, I honor you, and I'm so happy that you're here with us tonight. Tonight's event is the evolution of a conversation that began at the beginning of the pandemic when one of our collaborators and co-facilitators, Rua Swennerfeld, who is here with us from Transition Charlotte, Vermont, reached out and asked how we could uplift the transition message during that moment of great pause. And our national campaign, From What Is to What If, Reimagining and Rebuilding Our World, was born, inspired by Rob Hopkins' book of the same name. When we began planning this launch event on the power of stories, I immediately thought of Rivera. I've been inspired and deeply moved by her work, which captures so beautifully the spirit of love, compassion, and courage embodied by all great nonviolent social change movements and abundant in transition. I had the opportunity to hear Rivera speak on the power of stories and narrative in creating social change here in my local community in Paonia, Colorado, where Rivera has been helping train community members in nonviolent organizing strategies to stop fracking. And before I introduce Rivera, I just want to share a few pieces of housekeeping. Again, a reminder to just mute yourself for this portion of the program. Since there are so many of us, if you would like to focus on the speaker, so especially when we are hearing Rivera's presentation, so she's not tiny, you can go up to the right-hand corner of the black box on your screen, of the black screen. It says view. Click on that view and you can go to speaker view, and then you'll be seeing you'll be focusing on the one person who's talking rather than seeing everyone's faces, which is also fun, but we'll have more of a group participatory discussion at the end where it would make sense to have the gallery view. Feel free to chime in the chat window. We can have, ongoing conversation during this event in the chat. That's always fun, and sharing resources. And this event is going to be recorded. So after we hear from Rivera and maybe have time for some Q&A with her, we're gonna hear from Dawn an overview of the campaign, From What Is to What If, Reimagining and Rebuilding Our World. It actually has 3 parts to it, and there's a lot of inspiring things to hear about. He's also going to share some examples of stories that we've previously captured as part of our 10 Stories of Transition in the US project. Then we're going to move into breakout groups where we're inviting you all to share which stories have inspired you, and then to report back to the whole group on which of the stories you heard was the most inspiring. So we can start, or which of them were ones that you really want others to know about. We're going to start collecting a list of those stories. Then we'll talk about next steps, how to participate in the campaign, how to submit your story, and we're going to end with a live musical performance by Janco. So now it's my honor to introduce Rivera. Rivera Sun is the author of many books and novels, including the Dandelion Insurrection and the award-winning Ari Ara series, which my 13-year-old nephew and I are big fans of. That one's for young adults. She's a trainer in strategy for nonviolent movements and the editor of Nonviolence News. For 4 years, Rivera co-hosted radio shows on activism and social justice that were broadcasted nationwide through the Pacifica Network. Her essays on movements are syndicated by Peace Voice and featured in over 100 journals. And with that, I will turn it over to Rivera. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Marissa and Don and Rua and everyone with the Transition US team. Thank you so much for convening and hosting and gathering, because I really believe that this is vitally important to the transition that we are having to make as humanity. And I really honor the work that you and the entire network are doing. It's one of the hopeful spots in a sea of many other not so hopeful things that we are confronted with each day. And I'm just delighted to look around the screen and to flip through the pages on Zoom and see all of your beautiful faces. You are what gives me hope in these sometimes dark and sometimes just chaotic times. I love how you preface that we are feeling the breakdown part of the breakthrough. Does anyone else feel that way? Feel free to raise your hand. I can actually see you. Yeah. So I don't know your stories personally, but I went through a phase in my life where I kept telling these stories about what it might be like, when we hit that breakdown part of all of this, what it's going to be like. And I find myself constantly surprised that here we are and this is what it's like. And I think the thing that gives me hope in these times is that the other piece of what I imagine, not just the dark and scary and horrible, the other piece was that people want to take care of people. People want to step up and help each other. There's this whole underreported story that goes on in our world that is about how caring and compassionate and cooperative and collaborative humanity really is. And beneath the chatter of our president and others, there's actually been a consistent story through this entire time of the best of humanity coming forth. And as a novelist, this is where I anchor my work with stories. Is for years, I have always looked beneath the surface babble into where it is that ordinary people are showing up in extraordinary ways. Because to me, this is the best kind of story. And if we look at the stories that humanity has loved throughout all time, this is actually a pattern that we find over and over again in those stories. That the stories that we tell as humans are not just about the horrible stuff that's happening, and it's just not just about the utopia that we want to live in. It's actually largely about the journey of what happens when we decide to make a shift from the terrible towards the visionary, right? If we look at our epics, that's very much what a lot of those epics are actually rooted and anchored in. I'm going to say more about that in a little while, but I'd love to have you think for a minute. Maybe go back to your childhood, or maybe there's a more recent story. What is a story that you love, that you absolutely love? Just think about that for a minute. And if you want to pop it in the chat box, go ahead. I'd love to peek at what your stories are that you love. For me, one of the stories that I love is actually a very recent story. I love Moana. Has anybody ever seen that movie? Yeah, I could see those who raise your hands, your mouths just start smiling, Maybe you saw it with your grandkids or your kids. This is like a hidden gem in the Disney world. So I'm going to just pause and look at some of your responses. I see Watership Down and Siddhartha, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, The Little Prince, Ecotopia, thank you for those who love my books. Pippi Longstockings. Yeah, mythology stories of goddesses or folk tales. Ferdinand and the Bull. So in Sufi tradition, stories can become these almost like meditations. Like people will have particular stories that have particular significance to them. And each one is unique to each of us. But there is a reason why those stories move us so much. And so for me, when I think about the stories that move me, they always embody something that I need to get through the times that I'm in. They are a little bit out on my event horizon of who I want to be as a person. So it's something I aspire to. There's often friendship involved. There's a lot of creativity. And there's often somebody who is expected to do one thing, but decides to do something else instead. These are elements of stories. And when we start to look at what the element is, maybe in some of these stories that you've mentioned, you can start to see what it is that makes us tick as humans. We've been telling stories for 40,000 years, a very long time. And stories are actually some of humanity's first technology when you think about it. A story is a way to take our minds out of the present, think about something else, and come back from that imagining with skills, knowledge, wisdom, resources for where we need to go. So it might be interesting to reflect on the stories that meant so much to you in your life and try to identify what is one thing about that story that fed your soul, that nourished your heart. What was it about that story? And if it's something short, you can probably pop it in the chat box. Friendship, unexpected courage, imagination, peace, friendship, journeys, otherworldliness, commitment to right living, earthbound connection to another reality, ordinary people being kind to each other. I could feel what the story felt. Comfort in finding authenticity, community, cultural transformation, healing, integrity, kindness. So what would it be like if we told the story of our times in such a way that all of these qualities came forward, not just in one epic telling, but in an everyday lived reality for each and every single one of us? As I said before, we often in this day and age tell the story of our times in one of two ways. We often tell the negative story of all the things that are going wrong, all the scary things in our world, all the breakdowns, and goodness knows there's a lot of that story. And then sometimes we tell the story of the utopia, the vision, the place we want to get to. But the thing is, that's not where what human storytelling is all about. We don't just tell the story of what could be and what is, we also tell the story of how we journey from one to the other. And that's where you start to see all of these qualities you just mentioned. So when we think about these times, I often joke that, the Lord of the Rings has got nothing on the story of these times. I mean, we think of the Lord of the Rings as this massively epic, existential, life or death, stakes are high, hugely epic story. But compared to what we're living through right now, it's actually kind of paltry, not to knock it too much, but, we're looking at the extinction of humankind. We're up against great odds. We're really fractured as a society. But, those things that gave the Lord of the Rings, the companionship of the ring, their strength are also the things that give us strength. So it's not a solo journey. It's a journey of friends and companions, right? In fact, if Sam hadn't gone all the way with Frodo to Mordor, there would be no end of Sauron and end of the ring, because Sam had to pick up Frodo and carry him to the final steps. So that's a good lesson for us in our times. Don't go it alone. Make sure our story of these times is a story of how we journey together, because we need that friendship. We need the strengths of someone else to complement our shortcomings or our foolishness or our weak spots. And conversely, our strengths are there to help to balance out the other people in our companionship. So another thing is to remember that we don't just go on these journeys because everything is so bad. We go on a journey with a story because we think we can make it better. And that is very true for the Lord of the Rings. If you look at the Odyssey or the Iliad, the Ramayana, many of the stories you mentioned in the chat box, we go on a journey, and the stories that we love most as humans are stories of how we decided to leave behind what was comfortable, what was safe, what seemed safe-ish and familiar, not just because things were getting bad, but because we thought there was a chance we could make it better. And this is something that I think for our climate movement and for the transition movement, we can do better with our storytelling, right? So we're often saying, oh, things could be really great. And we're often saying, oh, things are really bad. But we're less often saying, look at us all here today. Come with us on this great adventure. You will find companionship. You will find friendship. You will find inspiration. You will rise to challenges in ways you always dreamed that you would be able to. You will confront the darkness and find light. You will have the chance to meet the very pressing issues of our time in ways that reveal the content of your character and the quality of your soul. Who wouldn't want to go on an adventure like that? Honestly, that is literally how almost every story we tell starts out. That is why every, little Arthur wants to go and pull the sword from the stone, right? He wants to go on an adventure. So someone asked in the chat box, why did I say that stories are technology? And why is it one of our earliest technologies? Well, because we don't have to do this storytelling thing. And, in the same ways that weaving is a technology, that the very clothes we're wearing is a technology, the food that we eat, agriculture, and the production of food is a technology. Stories are also a technology, and what they do is they help us imagine a way to get out of the place that we are. Or conversely, they don't. So I'd like you to reflect with me just for a moment. I'm going to tell you 3 stories about our time. And I want you to hear how each one goes. These are short stories, 2 sentences at most. I call these the Once Upon a Time stories. Once upon a time, the world was in danger, but everyone thought they were too small to make a difference. So they just did nothing, and they all died. The end. Raise your hand if you've ever heard this story in some form or another. Yeah, so this story of you're too small to make a difference, so just do nothing is pretty much a story that's been repeated to us over and over and over again. It's been very convenient for those who have caused the very problems and crises that we are in. And is ceasing to be convenient for them right now because basically they actually need us to understand that we can change this narrative. So I want to tell you another story. Once upon a time, the world faced huge problems, but people just wanted to keep partying and having fun. So the problems got bigger and they all died. The end. Raise your hand if you've ever noticed this story happening in our world. Describes a lot of US culture right now, doesn't it? Raise your hand or reflect if this is too revealing for you, if you have ever participated in this story. I know I have. I mean, Netflix binging, really fun, but really not going to save the planet today. Yeah. So these are two demoralizing stories that are actually very widespread in our culture. In one form or another, maybe in advertisements, in social expectations, in our workplaces. These are the underpinnings of, on a narrative level, why we're stuck. But the good news is that a better story can really change a lot of things. So here we go. Here's my third story. Once upon a time, the world was headed for disaster, but some of us decided we love it all too much to let it die. So we came together, embarked on an enormous epic quest full of adventure and struggle and challenge and unexpected things and maybe some monsters and maybe some wise crones along the way and magical happenings. There's a lot of things going on. But ultimately, we found the solutions. We confronted our own demons and the stuck places in our cultures, and we saved the world. The end, or perhaps the beginning. How did you feel about that story? Feel free to, this is sign language for clapping. You can put a word or two in the chat box if you want. How did you feel hearing that story? On your mark, get set, go. Hopeful. Nervous, yeah. I felt like it was the right ending. Inspired to believe and dream again. Optimism, hopeful, better. Goosebumps at the beginning. Like this could be fun. Big smile. Strange that we don't hear that story more. I've lived that one too and like it. Yeah. Raise your hand if you've ever felt like you've lived that story in large or small ways. Yeah. So here's the thing. Epic adventures are not unusual to our life experience. Seriously, they're very normal, which is why we resonate with these stories, even if they involve, monsters and dragons or magic. Those are actually metaphors for the very things that we experience on a day-to-day basis. When you're born, as you're growing up as a child, as your parents are preparing you for the world, you're handed. And they're all a little bit different, depending on who we are and our cultural backgrounds and our subcultural backgrounds. But most of these stories are in direct conflict with what the story of our times is all about. And I'll share mine to be a specific example. So, I was brought up with this story. I was going to go to school on a daily basis as a kid. I was going to try my hardest and do my best and hopefully get straight A's. I was going to get into college and learn some really useful skills and then go out into the world and get a job and work. And then with that job, I'd be able to buy a house and maybe have some kids and go on vacation once a year and live a good life, quote unquote. And then I would die, because most human stories sort of end that way. It's not particularly tragic, it's just what happens. But here's the thing about that story is that already I'm not even 40 yet, and that story has been completely not what's happened at all. And not only that, in this particular moment of human history, it is completely a dysfunctional story for humanity. Everything, single piece of that. What we need to understand is that the story of our times is a story of one of the most momentous moments of human history. A moment when all bets are off. All expectations of what our lives are going to be like are probably just guesses in the wind, and most likely not going to be true. The things that we know is that great change must happen, that we will have to be part of movements for change, or simply we're not going to have a future as humanity. That things are going to be very challenging and uncertain, that our versatility and our flexibility is one of our superpowers. But then most of all, that our friendships and connections are the very best possible wealth that any of us can cultivate, develop, and I would say earn, but you don't earn that kind of wealth. You build it together. This is the resilient glue that keeps the story of the humanity going. It's so common, this piece of the story, that now that scientists are getting over how, the elites sort of twisted Darwin to be all about survival of the fittest, which he only mentioned once or twice in the entire origin of species, by the way, they're discovering that evolution doesn't really rely on competition that much. It's much more reliant on cooperation, collaboration, and connection. And that these are so vitally important that we literally would not be here as humans without them. And I think that in the story of these times, we are not going to get to the next chapter without understanding that distinction and transforming that particular piece that is very strong in US culture, understanding that this is not going to be a solo journey. This is not going to be all on its own. This is going to be something that we do together, and that anytime our culture wants to teach us to be alone and isolated and a consumer, we should understand that that's part of the patterning of the story that got us to into this mess. But it's not part of the patterning that's going to get us out of this mess. So I'm going to stop there and open up for some of your questions, because I think we have a few minutes for that. And thank you for listening. I could talk about stories all day. What I have found as an activist and as an author is that a good story can change everything. And in fact, the very story of how we're going to change is going to be reliant on how well we can tell these stories. How much of a sense of epic adventure we can weave into the work we're doing. Not just that activism is a slog, because, honestly, sometimes it can be. But activism can also be courageous, inventive, creative, hopeful, uplifting, inspiring. I mean, think how many movies we have about war that kind of weave all that in. Well, to me, activism and change making is far more courageous, bold, extraordinary, love-based, the landscape of where our real heroism shows up than war can ever be. And so that means that this moment in human history is going to require some of the most extraordinary lived storytelling in human history. Our our descendants are going to get to tell the very best stories about us. Otherwise, there simply won't be any descendants to tell our stories. So thank you. Thank you for listening.
Wow, yeah. Thank you, Rivera. That set us up so well for our purpose here today. And I can tell that you could talk about stories all day, because that was completely different from the other talk I heard you give on the power of stories. And yeah, thank you for the piece about our descendants. I'm sure mine will have great stories to tell. So our first question in the chat here is, how do storytellers help unlock the creativity of those who are fearful with everything that's happening in the world? I think it would be best if people put their questions in the chat window, because that'll be easier for me to see that way. Do you want to respond to that first one?
Yeah, I think stories actually are a great way to meet people who are afraid, because so many stories are actually about how people took that next step even though they were afraid, or even though they were in despair, or even though they were so angry they felt like they couldn't do anything. If you look at many of the stories we shared, they're that's why we tell stories, right? Is because they help us actually navigate those moments. But I think you have to be understanding that people may be starting in fear, right? And acknowledging that is a great place to meet people where they're at. And then just that sense of feeling heard can sometimes allow someone to let go of the fear enough to hear another story, to hear what's possible, right? And I think, sometimes one of the things that we're seeing right now around climate is that there's some great phrase for this that I'm not remembering, but it's like, climate fear incapacitation. Like, we're so afraid now that some of us are starting to acknowledge that it's real. It's so overwhelming that we just can't do anything about it because it's so overwhelming, right? So that's when our stories need to be tangible. They need to have the next step. They need to be grounded in story-based telling of what works and what's possible. We need to celebrate the successes, because even amidst lots of collapse, there are these stunning successes that people need to know about. Like, we have had the ability to use solar panels for most of our energy purposes since I was born, right? And I think that's something that many of us forget, that we actually have the solutions, many of the solutions.
Thank you. We have another question from Rua. We're inviting people to share their stories. That's why we're here today. We're going to be asking people to write and share their stories. Do we all have to be amazing writers, or can we just write from our heart? And this made me think of something I saw on your Facebook page, Rivera, that made me feel a lot better about my own struggle to write. And that is kind of the phases that your writing goes through to get to excellent, I guess.
Yeah, people think I sit down and channel this stuff out of the ether. And I will admit there are a few moments, like maybe 2 pages worth of a book that come through that way. Most of the time I try and I write from the heart, and then I look at it and I say, how can I make what I just said from my heart more understandable for the person who's going to read it? How can I improve this so that the person who's going to read it is going to take it in really deeply? I think, I write stories because writing's one of the things that I love to do, but you can tell stories, you can video stories, you can use the radio to tell stories, you can make visual art stories. So there's a lot of mediums too that can be used very powerfully to tell stories. I think also practice helps. You know, as someone who does a lot of public speaking and does a lot of op-ed writing, I do repeat some of the things that I think about over and over, and they often get a little better as I do it. And everything I said tonight will get better the next time I say it too.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and Dawn will be talking a little bit more about different mediums you can use to share your story. We're very friendly and inclusive about various writing styles and abilities, and so we want to make it work for everyone. So the last question in the chat here from Ian Janco is, how do we stop ourselves from continually falling back into that protective individuality? And how do we inspire others to see the bigger picture and join the movement?
Yeah, that protective individuality. So first, I do recommend that if you have a chance, you watch The Social Dilemma. It really illuminates the ways in which some of our technologies have really given us an impression of who we are as human beings that is not necessarily akin to what we experience on the ground. So they're like competing narratives about what humans are, but also what US people are. And honestly, I think a lot of the fears that we have of one another are not really founded when we actually, have direct person-to-person interactions. So that's not a direct answer to your question, because, I think noticing, you have to be willing to pay attention and look at, how did I just habitually replicate a pattern of isolation and individuation in our society, right? When did I just order a book on Amazon instead of posting on Facebook, or, going to the library, posting on Facebook to see if your friend had it, right? Or looking at the little free library to see if it happens to be stuck in there, or maybe taking a chance on a book that you never imagined you would read. So that's the kind of like, notice how you're getting from point A to point B throughout the day, and notice how that may be a very individual journey, or maybe something that brings you into community. The other question was about the climate movement. How do we inspire people to be part of our movements? I think, a surprising answer to that is to ask them directly, not like, big email blasts, please come and join our movement, but, directly going to someone and saying, there's going to be a demonstration on Saturday night. Why don't you come? We could talk about how the kids are through our masks, or, would you be part of my activist art pod, and we can make posters to go put up around town. So yeah, making it fun is a big part of it, and also making the ask as a human being.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's sometimes overlooked and very, very important, the power of the one-on-one connection. Oh, wonderful, Rivera. Really appreciate it. That was really inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just, there is one question I'd love to address.
Sure.
From Gail. Are you looking at how our stories of a thriving future must be grounded in an exploration of uprooting our racist, patriarchal, classist, repressed history and present? I would say that, personally, all of the novels one of the reasons I write novels is because it gives me lots of chances to like pull out one piece of that root at a time and plant something different. So yes, I completely agree that, when we're telling stories, reflecting deeply on those stories can be so powerful that we really don't want to be replicating some of the nasty patterns of the past in the future story that we're telling. And many of you have mentioned Octavia Butler or Adrienne Marie Brown, or N.K. Jemisin or Nnedi Okorafor. These are all Black futurist writers. And one of the things I do personally is I try to read outside my cultural background, whether that's fiction or nonfiction, because I get ideas for things that totally upend everything I've ever been taught to believe, that make me see things in a completely different way. And I think, it's part of the work we need to do if we want to tell stories that are uprooting the assumptions that we're given. I grew up in the 1980s and 90s when the fractured fairy tales were very much in vogue. And it was a great lesson in like, question everything. Question why, these folktales have come in this format. Why, the prime goal is always for the prince to rescue the princess, or for you to become a member of the rich ruling class. That's like the ideal of those stories. And learn to question those assumptions so that you can be part of telling a different, better story, and not just blindly or unconsciously replicating the very problems we're trying to leave behind. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very important thread. Thank you for speaking to that, Rivera. And thank you for your question, Gail. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dawn to get us into the overview of the campaign and a little bit more about Stories Project.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rivera. Really enjoyed your presentation. We talked a lot about stories so far. Now we're going to talk a little bit about action and how we can bridge the two. So Marissa was saying a little bit at the outset how our national campaign, From What Is to What If, Reimagining and Rebuilding Our World, got started. And it really started with the pandemic. We were initially planning on holding a big national gathering like we did in 2017 in Western Vermont, and we couldn't do that anymore. So a group of us got together to think of, what could we do in its place that would really bring people together and give people a sense of that connection and hopefulness in these really difficult times. And this is what we came up with, which is a year-long campaign leading up to an online national gathering next summer, looking at how we can create this more just, sustainable, and regenerative future in the light of all the challenges that we're experiencing right now. And it takes place in 3 overlapping phases. So the first one, positive visioning, launched earlier this summer. And then we started moving into the movement strategy phase, which is still ongoing. And now launching the stories to action phase of this campaign. And you can find out more about all what I'm talking about here at transitionus.org/whatif. So I'm just going to briefly go through a little bit more about this campaign and specifically about the stories that we're looking to gather from this national network that we have here. People doing local community resilience building and the stories that we want to share and reflect back to the world. So this campaign is named after transition movement founder Rob Hopkins' latest book about unleashing the power of the imagination to create the future we want. And if you haven't looked into this book yet, it's full of amazing stories about how people are using that power of imagination to really transform their communities in amazing ways. One of my favorite stories is about somebody who was had the idea to make London the first national park city in England, and how organize people throughout the city to create more green space so that they could qualify as a national park city, which they have. And if you're interested in going deeper on Rob's book or reading it for the first time, Chelsea Green Publishing, the publisher of From What Is to What If, is offering book discounts to groups that want to hold book clubs around this, providing a reader's guide, and there will be a live Q&A with Rob at the end of these book clubs on November 21st. We don't have information about this up on our website at the moment, but we will be getting it back up tomorrow. So please do check back if you're interested in either the book discounts or the book clubs. So as I mentioned, phase 1 of this campaign has to do with positive visioning. And in transition, we lead from the positive vision of the future that we have and work to then bring that into reality. And so we've partnered up with a professor from The Ohio State University, Anna Willow, in the anthropology department. And she created a survey looking at the year 2040 and encouraging us to vision out 20 years, to answer questions like, where does our food come from? Where does our water come from? What do we do for fun? How does where are we living? What is our local community like? What are our relationships? And really exploring what the possibilities are. And so there's an invitation on our website to share your visions with our national network. We're sharing them in a number of different ways right now through our website and social media and newsletter, but we'll continue to find different ways to weave in excerpts from these visions. And if you prefer not to write your vision, but to paint your vision or sing your vision, you can email us videos, audio recordings, images at info@transitionus.org. So we invite you to participate in that. There's a lot of great things on our website to help kind of stoke the fire around positive visioning, to get you started, examples of visions, and a guided exercise to vision the year 2040. So next, we moved into movement strategy, picking up on a process that started earlier this year with Transition US staff and members of our board of directors, interviewing and surveying over 60 key leaders in our national movement about their thoughts about the future of Transition US and the transition movement here in the United States. And from out of that, Marissa pulled together a wonderful document summarizing those findings that are, again, on the website. And we've been holding monthly sessions, monthly national network strategy conversations with leaders from throughout the movement to go deeper in each of the key thematic areas that have come up. So we've already hosted conversations on deepening our analysis, particularly around social justice and the extractive economy. We hosted a session on communications, messaging, and storytelling, and a conversation on strengthening the grassroots transition network. And we still have 3 more coming up in the next 3 more months around resourcing our movement, building capacity and increasing our impact, and power, leadership, and a healthy movement culture. So these invitations have gone out to folks that are part of official transition groups, but you can also request an invitation to participate in these conversations moving forward by emailing Marissa, and I'm sure she'll drop her email address in the chat. And we're looking forward to organizing a second series in the first half of next year that you can also participate in to address some of the topics that we didn't get to in the first round. So all of this is leading to kind of the next evolution of the strategy for our movement here in the US that's co-created by all of us together. And the third phase, which we're rolling out now, is around stories to action. So gathering in stories of successful and replicable community resilience building projects from all over the US, from around the world, and sharing these stories back out to not just give people hope that there are good things going on in the world, which, is really important because we don't see this a lot in the news media. We don't often see this coming across our social media feeds. We see a lot of bad news. So getting some more good news out there, but particularly with an eye to, how can these little successes that are happening all over the place, little innovations, be replicated more widely? How can we teach each other how to do this, how to do these kind of projects in our local community? So some of these will be published on our website, shared through social media, through our newsletter, but we're also inviting those who are interested and can submit a story by November 15th to do so and be eligible to receive a $500 stipend to put on a webinar and lead a online learning cohort of people who are interested in replicating your project. So those who apply by November 15th, submit your story. What happened? What were the positive impacts? What were the challenges? And what were the lessons learned? What advice would you have for other people who are interested in doing something similar in their local community? We will be selecting 4 of those to go deeper through the webinars and the learning cohort. And possibly some of these stories will be included in forthcoming podcasts and a book very similar to our 10 stories of transition in the US that we published last year. So I want to go through a few of these stories from this book. Maybe you know some of them, maybe you don't. But to give you a sense of the kinds of stories that we're looking for, and maybe to kind of get the creative juices flowing, to see work that you've done as something that you could contribute to this stories to action phase from what is to what if, or maybe stories that that you haven't been directly involved in, but you know of, and you could encourage those stories to be told more widely. So most of these stories will probably focus on just a single inspiring project, like this one that I was part of with Transition Sarasota in Florida, the Suncoast Gleaning Project, where now for 10 years, we've organized teams of volunteers to go out to local farms and harvest whatever produce is not going to make it to market, and to make that available to the food insecure in our communities through our local food banks. And now over 300,000 pounds of local organic produce have been donated to those in need. And strong communities have been built among the volunteers for this project. So that's something that you can read more about and get inspired and learn how you might start a gleaning project in your local community. Overall, with these stories, we want people to be able to read them and think, oh, I could do that. What a great idea. This is something that I could totally see happening in my local community, and that would make sense for it and that would meet its needs. So offering a diversity of different kinds of stories to meet all those different needs and interests. So we also had stories about projects that are already being replicated all over the place, like the Repair Cafe movement that began in the Netherlands and has been taken on by a number of transition initiatives and other groups throughout this country. So a story could be about one project that's happening in multiple locations and the differences between how that project unfolded in different locations. Or it could be about a single group that has many projects that are going on, like Transition Town Media in Pennsylvania. a number of whose members are here with us tonight. They have an amazing free store, and they worked on a great Solarize project, and operated as a time bank, and have a number of different working groups, and really kind of exploring what's made this initiative so vibrant and so successful. And they don't need to be grandiose stories. You know, it could be something as simple as an innovative way, a creative way of doing community engagement and education, like Transition Twin Cities did with their Grove of Life, installing these trees throughout a community festival and having people hang leaves with their intentions for creating a better world. And this was something that you know, really engaged thousands of people in their community in thinking about how we might make this transition and what they might contribute. So a little bit more fun and celebratory than your average PowerPoint presentation or you know, documentary film screening. They can even be about innovative strategies for supporting inner resilience or fostering effective collaboration within groups or between groups. Like the story of Woodstock, New York's transition working group support, where they had realized that they had launched all these different working groups and that they needed to create another working group to really help those groups be as successful as possible. And that being kind of an innovative structure for supporting the growth of transition initiatives in local communities. But yes, we do want stories that, that demonstrate large positive impacts. We're not going to turn any of those away. Like I said, we want a diversity of stories, different topics, different locations, different contexts, different approaches. This one was about Local 2020 in Port Townsend, Washington, their groundbreaking local investing opportunities network that has now moved over $7 million into local social enterprises throughout their community. Or this one about a spin-off from Transition Milwaukee, the Victory Garden Initiative in their community that has now helped plant over 4,000 gardens in every neighborhood throughout their cities. So we know that a lot of you out there have amazing stories, things to contribute and share with the world. And we really encourage you to participate in this. And we're going to get the ball rolling next by basically turning it over to you to discuss some of the stories that have most inspired you in breakout groups. And for that, I will pass it over to my friend and colleague, Ruis Wennerfeld, to lead us into that process.
Thank you, John. Well, good evening so far. Lots of inspiration, and so now it's our chance to share some stories that have inspired us. As we break into small groups, we're going to have about 4 people in each group. So you'll actually have a bit of time because you'll have maybe 7 minutes each to share, 6 or 7 minutes, some stories that have inspired you, things that you've been part of, or stories you've heard. We'd like you each to choose a timekeeper and also choose a note taker who will then report one story to the whole group that everybody chooses would be that one story. When the story is shared in the whole group, it will be a summary of it, and hold on to the notes of those stories, and we will give you an opportunity of where to send those notes so that we can maybe encourage the people that are involved in those stories to share for this whole project. So I think Dawn is going to put us into those small groups, and I'll see you afterwards to hear from you. All right, so that's rolling. So we have about a minute and a half to 2 minutes maximum to share the one story, the people who were the recorders for their groups. And if you raise your hand, that recorder can share a story. I can't see everybody. Okay, so Ian will start and share a story. And I'm going to have a little timer that dings at about a minute and a half. So he'll be the example. And you are muted, Ian.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So I was elected to share my own story. So it's not me. I did not elect myself, but my story was that I am American originally, but I'm living in London now. And during lockdown, what I experienced was hearing all of the traffic disappearing from the streets, and I live on a very busy road. So I was able to gradually over time start waking up and hearing the birds in my backyard, and that was a really profound thing for me because I really missed the sounds of nature, and being able to hear the birds sort of gave me this sense of, oh, maybe we're headed towards something where nature can live in a bit more harmony with cities, and that really inspired me. And you'll see later that that informed the song I'm going to perform later. And I just thought that that was a nice, simple way for all of us to maybe connect to what we're aiming for, which is a bit more of union with nature, union with each other, and simplicity. And I think that the concept of birds singing is a really simple way to put a pin in where we're headed. So that was what I shared with the group. And there was another funny little anecdote. We were in the group with Bert, and he thought that I was saying Bert song, and that we had a good little chuckle after that. So yeah, follow the bird song. That was my anecdote.
Wow, what great timing, Ian. Thank you. Isn't it fun to hear these stories and think about how they touch us too, right? So anybody else want to raise their hand from their group? Is that you, Marissa? You want to?
Sure, that was my silent clapping, but we had a great story about a repair cafe and homesteaders teaching Skillshares, but the story we decided to share was Clayton's from Transition Woodstock, New York, which their working group support group was highlighted in our 10 Stories of Transition book that Dawn showed earlier, which was also disseminated internationally by Transition Network. And the Woodstock Working Group Support Group had a mission of supporting the whole transition movement with their group dynamics and conflict resolution. And we're actually contacted by a group in the UK that had about 10,000 followers on their, at least on their Facebook page. So we know they had a good reach, but they were dealing with a really serious conflict that was tearing the group apart. And they asked for support from the Woodstock Working Group Support Group, and they were able to successfully resolve that conflict. So we want to tell a story that makes group dynamics and conflict transformation sexy. If anyone can help us with that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And very impressive. Wow. All right. Somebody else who wants to share? I can't see everybody. So I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but I know the last name's O'Flynn.
It's pronounced Sive, rhymes with five.
Ah, lovely. Yeah, really. Okay.
So Don and Mandy and I talked a little bit about a few different things. We talked about, you know, the creation of new communities by buying up some land, you know, in a group with other people. But I wanted to share a story that that I had as an experience in New York one summer with a friend who started the Fulton Stall Market, which was it was a farmless farmers market. So it was just a bricks and mortar thing in like down in Fulton Street, which is kind of in the financial district, which was getting a facelift. Some of the historical old areas there, and they managed to get themselves inserted into this beautiful location. Just right, you know, it was shocking that they would even be allowed to put that in there, because it should have gone for a lot of money. But instead it was just this non-profit making place for farmers to come put their produce, meet each other, develop networks. There were events, and there was, you know, samples. We would do samples every day. It was not very organized, but it was very positive and very full of energy, and people would just stop and come in, and, you know, passing by the street, they would come in and say, what is this, you know, and you just explain about food and about where the food was coming from, that you directly knew the farmers, that the farmers might be dropping in new produce tomorrow or the next day. And it's still going to this day, which I'm very pleased to see. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Inspiring, huh? It can happen anywhere. I saw another hand up. Sorry. And yeah, good.
Well, I was drafted to tell my story. It's a bit of a hero's journey, I guess. My husband and I took a 9,000-mile, 6.5-month bike trip around the country on a tandem bike. So I think the real story to it, although there's many stories in it, was that when we decided to do this, I was kind of, when he said he wanted to do this, I was kind of really going into it kicking and screaming and saying all the bad things that could happen, and, you know, how crazy this really was. And you know, we were both around 60, and our parents were in their 90s, and, you know, we can't go away for 6 months. It's crazy. And on and on and on. And I finally realized that he was not going to give up the idea. So I decided to just surrender to it and accept it and go for it. And ever since that moment, it kind of really took on a magical sort of quality that really stayed with us the whole time. You know, it was sort of like we had some guardian angels or something watching over us throughout the trip, because every time we go somewhere, there'd be something that had happened the day before, and it was you know, like a really bad storm went through and knocked down you know, a bunch of trees and left debris all over the place, and we missed it by a day. Didn't have any trouble with it at all. And, you know, other things like that, like wildfires in California, we missed them by a day. You know, it was just phenomenal how we just breezed through without any real problems at all. And met a whole bunch of really interesting people along the way too, and just formed, you know, some great friendships, some of which we are still in touch with 12 years later. So yeah, it was sort of the magic of surrendering to something.
Absolutely beautiful. A wonderful story. Thank you so much. Okay, so on to the next. It's hard to not be able to linger. Rivera's going to share a story.
So I am the appointed note taker and story sharer for my group. I have an amazing story to share from Kat in Transition Wayland. They had a transition member who was a core mischief maker and a major schemer and a beautiful member of their group who was sadly diagnosed with a brain tumor and became really sick. So the transition group pivoted from a lot of the work they were doing to being on the ground care support, making sure she had groceries and food and felt surrounded by love during her passing. And they really dropped everything to take care of her. But when it got close to the end, she turned around with this question, this request, and she asked them to build her a coffin. And she did this by saying, you know, I don't want any metal in it at all, knowing that this would challenge the group to go and ask other people for help on this. So they went and they asked a carpenter and a woodworker, someone who had a woodworking shop, and connected to so many people in the community, getting out of the bubble that they had formed and reaching back out with this last request. And even much later, someone came up in the grocery store and said to Kat, "Were you part of the group that was building that coffin for that beautiful person?" And it was this amazing story of how one person's life can give so much to a transition movement in so many different ways. It was so moving. I cried.
Wow. Thank you. Oh my gosh. And what a storyteller to tell the story to. Thank you, Rivera. Okay, we probably have a few more groups. Anybody else want to share from their group? I see a hand. Shelley.
Shelley, yeah. I was the note taker. We might all end up talking. I don't know, because others took notes for me too. But we all ended up finding out we were all artists. Eliza has been working since 2005, trying to find commercial spaces that she can be using for community benefit for arts studios or arts venues, and she's finding it incredibly difficult. Because for one thing, artists are very hard to collaborate with, who tend to be kind of individual, and people have different ideas. She finds herself working with very difficult people, and so does Bonnie in her garden. She finds herself working with very difficult people. That's something that we all agreed on. This is the way the world is. We work with difficult people. And I was particularly moved by Liza's story, and Liza might want to take it over from this point, because I found that as an artist, I'm in kind of a crisis right now, because I'm wondering if as an artist I'm more effective in activism than I am as an activist, working with racial equity, because I appreciated what she was trying to do, because art is a way to bridge the partisan divides, to get past the partisan divides that can happen when you use words that trigger certain feelings in people, or get past the fears that people have that make them want to search for something authoritarian to protect them. So just appreciate.
We don't have the time to have someone else share. We've finished the time that we have for this group, so I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you, and it sounds like it was a wonderful group. And hopefully all these notes will go to the Transition US staff. So we have a couple more groups, I think, to share, and then we're wrapping this up. Anybody else sharing from a group? Everybody has shared?
I see in the Abby Jenks messaged me that I think her group still needs to share. She said we didn't designate someone. Abby, are you up for sharing on behalf of your group? And if so, you'll just need to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Unless great.
I don't necessarily want to talk about my thing. I think our group was really an example of how just small things can bring so much meaning to the whole transition movement. But that's only my take. I feel like I don't really want to speak for the group, so I just wanted to let you guys know that we really didn't designate anybody to highlight a particular story, but you know, it was small seeds of planting ideas and doing, you know, small projects that I think really take form after time.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have one more group. Dawn says to me that we have one more group to share, and we are just at that time, so it must be Eric.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, well, we had a great group full of inspiring stories, but I think the one I want to share, I did take notes of everything, which is unusual for me, but Laura shared about her efforts with a transition town group in Vermont called Transition Town Jericho. And I guess what inspired me was a story of bringing farmers together who felt disconnected to the community. And one farmer in particular said he would love to plant a row for the community or for you know, other than his commercial efforts, but he couldn't do it himself. And their transition group sprung at the opportunity to take action, and they showed up as a group and did the necessary labor that would have taken a long time for a person. They did it in an hour, which I'm very inspired by that kind of story of community. So that's probably enough.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks everyone, and I think it's over to Dawn. Dawn, will you let people know where they can share their notes?
Yeah, please email them to Marissa, marissa@transitionus.org. She did put her email in the chat. So we'd love to get those notes. And we have just wanted to refresh your minds about some next steps that you can take here before our grand finale musical performance. So you go to our website, transitionus.org/whatif. You can take this guided visualization. I didn't think about wearing the same shirt, but it just happened. You can find lots of resources for inspiring your visions, like this message from the future with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and others. Then fill out the survey from Anna Willow at Ohio State University. You can also email to us at info@transitionus.org. Any videos, images, audio recordings that you might have. Under the movement strategy phase, take some time to read Marissa's excellent paper on movement strategy recommendations from these 60 key leaders that we surveyed and interviewed earlier this year. And show up to join one of our national network strategy conversations. We'd love to have you. Get inspired by reading some more stories on our website. If you want to go there and make a small donation to support this work, you're more than welcome to, and we will send you a digital copy of 10 Stories of Transition in the US. for as little as a $5 donation. You can also read the individual stories for free on the website. And share your story, or invite others to share their stories. If you think that there's a story that you know of that needs to be told, that needs to be celebrated in a much wider way, send them a link, send them the invitation, or let us know and we can contact them. And again, this is all at transitionus.org. So we hope you will get involved. All three of these phases will continue through next year. So still plenty of time to participate. And for a send-off of sorts here, I want to introduce Ian Janco, who has already partially introduced himself. He is a singer-songwriter from the US, but currently based out of London. He is very graciously with us at about 2 a.m. his time, but as he said, he's a musician. He's pretty used to that. But I guess what I want to say to introduce Ian is that he very serendipitously contacted us just as we were beginning this campaign, just as we were getting it put together, and shared his song and his music video for Someday. And immediately when I heard it, I felt, oh, this is like a theme song for the entire campaign. Incredibly inspiring, very beautiful, and just grateful that he's here with us tonight to perform his song. So I'll turn it over to Ian.
Thank you, Don. Can everyone hear me okay? And can you hear the guitar okay? Yeah? Fantastic. So yeah, thank you everyone for this inspiring event. This has been incredible. Thanks to Transition US for organizing it, and you all for taking part. This is really, really cool and really inspiring. And I want to say a couple things about the song you're about to hear and the video that you're about to see that is actually more serendipity, and that is that my dad, Eric, who just spoke, who's actually in the meeting, during lockdown, recommended From What Is to What If by Rob Hopkins to me, and I was listening to that audiobook while jogging around my local park in Clapham, which is South London, thinking about all these things, thinking about the song because I was about to release it and what I wanted the video to be. So the video that you're about to watch is actually really informed by the transition movement without me having made initial contact with it. So I think that's something that's quite cool, and this feels like a very sort of full circle moment. So obviously there's some Black Lives Matter protests inspiration in it as well, but during lockdown I worked with a graphic designer and an artist called Sophie Graves to create this video, but it was very much a vision that was inspired by the transition movement. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope it inspires you. And before I play, one more thing that I want to say, Dawn's going to post some links in the chat, and those are links to my pages if any of you want to follow. But also I've just this evening released an acoustic version of this song. It's like a piano ballad version that's exclusive only on Bandcamp, and I've offered like a pay what you want thing, and I'm going to give 50% of whatever is made off of that release to Transition US to help with this campaign. So you can pay $1, or you can pay 20, you can pay whatever you like. And I will give 50% of those donations to Transition, and the other 50% will go to a starving artist who is trapped in London, who cannot return home. So any donations would be super appreciated, and I spent a lot of time on that track. Anyway, without further ado, we will perform this version of Someday. Hope you all really enjoyed this, and thank you for having me as the closer. Ready with the link, Don?
Yep. Just getting it up, full screen.
Here we go.
Okay.
Take a look at this confusion that's rolling over the lands of our lives. We may be brilliant, but we're damaged. It's like we don't even see the signs. And we gotta let go of everything we're fighting for. We gotta let go of everything that came before. Someday we'll live in a world without greed. Someday we'll know what it's like to be free. The bravest heroes come from nothing, and we've got something to say. Someday we're gonna change the world. We'll try our best to build the future, but the past will never let us go. We've lived like we're the only ones under the sun, and now we've hurt the world that helped us grow. We gotta let go of everything we're fighting for. Oh. We gotta let go of everything that came before. Someday we'll live in a world without greed. Someday we'll know what it's like to be free. The bravest heroes come from nothing, and we've got something to say. Someday we're gonna change the world. Picture your perfect day. Whatever you see now, it'll come your way. I know what it's like to be lonely, what it's like to be scared of the great unknown. I know we'll find a way. Whoa, someday we'll live in a world without greed. Oh, yeah, yeah, someday we'll know what it's like to be free. Yeah, 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 the bravest heroes come from nothing, and we've got something to say. Whoa, someday we're gonna change the world. Someday we're gonna change the world. Everyone. And one last thing I wanted to mention that Dawn brought up that I forgot to say before is that someday could be taken as, oh, far in the future, but someday can be when you picture it. When we picture it, let's put it in the future and let's work towards it and make it happen. It's not sarcastic, it's not pessimistic, it is optimistic. And thank you guys very, very, very much for having me. Appreciate it.
And thanks to everybody for coming. Do feel free to unmute and say some goodbyes.
Bye.
Till soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.